That's not good for a residential neighborhood like this.
We've just taken this feed of our videographer, George Mitchell, who was on the scene.
Police, hands up. Police, put your hands up.
Take care. I'm sorry, you get that out of my house.
Look, I don't need my picture. Take it by this goon.
And photographer George Mitchell.
News 2 Houston photographer George Mitchell. Photographer George Mitchell.
Photojournalist George Mitchell.
Our ace photographer George Mitchell.
Hazardous duty pay here for cameraman George Mitchell in the line of fire.
And George Mitchell swept the Television Photojournalist of the Year award.
And the last Emmy for camera goes to George Mitchell, KPRC-TV, Houston, Texas.
Thank you to everyone involved.
I want to thank CBS 4 photographer George Mitchell, the only South Florida television news photographer who captured those dramatic scenes this morning here.
And the Emmy goes to Individual Craft Composite, George M. Mitchell, WKRN.
Thank you very much.
News 2 Houston photographer George Mitchell. This event pays tribute to the real reason we're here, journalism. And now let's move on to our awards for excellence in television. And now for television features, short form, the finalists are George Mitchell, WKRN TV, Nashville, 99-year-old janitor, the story of Willie Brandon. Ruthie Zell, KETC TV, St. Louis, Living St. Louis Jazz Outreach. And Darian Trotter, WSMV TV, Nashville, Snowman. And the award goes to...
My grandfather was a slave and was sold at the courthouse where I was working there. My granddad was sold on the steps of that courthouse for $750 and was shipped to Virginia and freed in Virginia.
George Mitchell, WKRN TV, Nashville, 99-year-old janitor, the story of Willie Brandon.
Photojournalist George Mitchell.
Their News 2 photojournalist George Mitchell is in the middle of everything at the Barnes & Noble in Opry Mills. A big crowd out there, George?
Oh, yes, Bob, it sure is.
Video journalist George Mitchell.
News 2 video journalist George Mitchell.
News 2 video journalist George Mitchell.
George Mitchell. News 2 video journalist George Mitchell has their story.
Video journalist George Mitchell.
George Mitchell reports.
George Mitchell spoke with members of Sergeant Taylor's family today.
News 2 video journalist George Mitchell found strong opinions on both sides. News 2 video journalist George Mitchell has their story. News 2 video journalist George Mitchell.
News 2 video journalist George Mitchell introduces us to Jean Cook, a woman who's feeding not only hungry stomachs, but also hungry souls.
News 2 photojournalist George Mitchell.
Photographer George Mitchell.
And photojournalist George Mitchell.
Photojournalist George Mitchell.
Photojournalist George Mitchell.
Photojournalist George Mitchell went out on this beautiful evening and took that beautiful picture. Thank you, George.
Photojournalist George Mitchell picked up 2 awards, and George will take good care of this.
We're going to show you George Mitchell accepting his award right here for camera work at the ceremony in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He did such a fantastic job.
George Mitchell received the SPJ's Green Eye Shade Award presented in Atlanta. It represents the best in the South.
First place goes to George Mitchell of KPRC TV.
Another group of people who work outside, reporters and photographers. My photographer George Mitchell lugs around 50 pounds of equipment every day, so he's trying to control his breathing too.
A cab driver vanishes for 4 days. New tonight, the driver is found alive by a News 2 photographer.
News photographer George Mitchell was just leaving the station after the 6 o'clock news. He pulled up to this stoplight and spotted the cab turning left. Just to make sure it was him, George followed the cab back down Murfreesboro Road to the Drake Motel, where Don got out of the vehicle.
Screwed up, and I know it.
Don't turn that light on. No light.
As the man maintains his position with child and gun in hand.
At one point, you and George were in quite a precarious position as he was coming right toward y'all.
She told me go get her gun. I went and got her gun. And then she shot him in the leg, and she went over, and then she shot Kim twice, I reckon, and then she shot Pete, her ex-husband, what, 2 or 3 more times?
So all I wanted from the beginning was, to get help. And I just, I just thought if this was the only way that I could get help, then, I was willing to do it.